And Magnus, let's just go over there to that end. But we're going to start now, and let me start by apologizing to everybody for this delay. We were caught between two events, and we had problem connecting to you. This program of today, it's one of our ways of examining. It's another way of examining world issues. And the idea around it is that institutions like ours should, from time to time, make time to consider, evaluate policies in the world, and in this propose some policies as well. The topic we have today is a peculiar topic, and I hope a fascinating one, because it brings together continents that, though close in culture and vicinity, do not have a lot of linkages most of the time. We're going to look at Saudi Arabia and Africa. We're going to look at it in a context of what is going on in Saudi Arabia, and also look at it in the context of what Saudi Arabia has in stock for Africa. And this is a fascinating bit, as we shall soon see, because in the governance and in the vision of Saudi, they've actually taken time to create a clear space for Africa in their thoughts. So we look at what's going on there. We see the consideration they've made for Africa. Then we also hope to look at the lessons that Africa can gain from this kind of analysis and observation. And so to do this for us, we have chosen somebody who has spent a lot of time analyzing these issues as a scholar, as a Commonwealth scholar, but also who was not only intellectually been engaged in this, but has also physically visited this country and participated in their thoughts. So to that extent, we have what we call a coincidence of observer and participants. So we have somebody who is engaged intellectually in this study, but who has also had the fortune and the duty of visiting Saudi Arabia, visiting the forum of their policy making. I must say here that I'm very envious that he did not take me to that event when he went to the gathering of world leaders in the FII. But now that he has brought his knowledge, we can all share in it. Our speaker for today, Magnus Oyinbe, is a scholar, a writer, an administrator, an international affairs expert, a Commonwealth scholar who has written extensively on matters of international relations, public policy, both national and global. And he's a staunch advocate of progress by empirical facts. I think one of the things that distinguishes Magnus Oyinbe from other scholars is that he doesn't move on theory, he starts from practice. He looks at what works and what does not work and makes his case. And because of that, he becomes a fascinating, but I think also dangerous scholar, because he doesn't care where the right thing is. He goes for it. His alliance moves from anyhow. And that is why today we have the luck of talking about Saudi Arabia, Africa, lessons for Africa. And I hope we have a good conversation. Before I yield the floor to Magnus and Ibe to talk to us, let me find out if there is anybody who wants to lay out expectations from the day. For those who are new to this forum, two things. Number one is that this forum is being hosted by the Cambridge African Roundtable, which is a forum that hosts conversation around, about, in Africa for its development. And luckily with us, the Commonwealth Institute of Advanced and Professional Studies, and we have brought in the CAPS rule in which every participant is not just a listener, but a contributor as well. So to that extent, we start by asking people to look at the topic of the day and to signify what their expectations would be from this topic of the day. So I yield the floor to anybody who's online, who's present with us, to look at the topic of the day and tell us, either verbally, which I prefer, or by typing in, which somebody will tell us. But anyway, to tell us, given the topic, what are the things you like to take away from this? Thank you very much. Once again, I apologize for the delayed start. It's a matter of communication, but that's very regrettable. So I yield the floor. Let's have anybody tell us what they would like to take away from this session. I'm getting a note saying they would like to know the relationship between Africa and Saudi Arabia. I think that should be mentioned. It's an old relationship, and we can look into that. Okay, if we have further comments, we can get them later. For now, I'm going to welcome for our 10th speaker of the year, and with the last speaker of this year, Magnus Onyibe, to talk to us about Saudi Arabia's vision 2030 and Africa. Lessons for Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Hey, Professor. I'm very happy to be here. As Professor had explained earlier, we apologize for the delay. We're caught up between two very important programs. So I'll just go straight into my finding that I want to humbly report to you. As a professor had introduced me earlier, my name is Magnus Onyibe. So the theme is Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 and Africa. It's hosted, as Professor said, by the Commonwealth Institute of Advanced and Professional Studies. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to humbly stand before you to share insights from my recent participation in the 9th Future Investment Initiative, FII-9, held in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, a nation that in the past decade has undergone such profound reforms that it's increasingly difficult to describe it as a hydrocarbon-dependent state. Instead, it has rapidly evolved into a technology-driven economy, eager to share its prosperity with the world, especially Africa, with which it has maintained trading relations for over a millennium, dating back to the trans-Saharan trade era. One moment that struck me deeply was the symbolism of the 7-star Ritz-Carlton Hotel, best known for hosting the 2017 dictation of Saudi Arabia's wealthiest princes who were compelled to relinquish significant portions of their fortunes for the public good, serving as the venue for FII 9. The transformation of a space once associated with the restraint of the powerful into a global platform for innovation and investment was not lost on me. It underscores Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's sweeping anti-corruption drive, during which several princes and billionaires were detained on charges ranging from bribery to money laundering and abuse of office. Analysts widely agree that the purge was intended not to consolidate power, but also to address entrenched corruption and advance the structural reforms behind Vision 2030. Launched in 2016 as the Crown Prince assumed de facto leadership from his aging father. Notable detainees included Prince Al-Walid bin Talal, Prince Mutaib bin Abdallah, former head of the National Guard, Prince Fahad bin Abdallah, a former deputy defense minister, Prince Khalid bin Talal, and businessman Amar Dabag and Bakari bin Laden. Reports surrounding the episode describe the Ritz-Carlton as a makeshift detention center, with some accounts alleging coercion to compel full disclosure of assets. The process led to massive recoveries and further solidified the authority of Mohammed bin Salman. This episode offers important lessons for Africa. Many African nations continue to struggle with pervasive corruption. And while the Saudi approach may appear severe, it has undeniably tackled long-standing graft. Africa's deepening debt crisis often stem from leaders who plunder national treasuries and emerge wealthier than their own countries. Across the continent, leaders are routinely criticized for extravagant lifestyles amid widespread poverty, failing health systems, and inadequate schools. Some openly flaunt opulence as their nations drown in debt, unlike in Saudi Arabia, where unearned wealth was forcibly curtailed in the interest of national renewal. The legendary excesses of Mobutu Sese Seko of the Democratic Republic of Congo remain a classic example. Returning to the Ritz-Carlton, once a holding ground for the elite, it hosted the FII 9 I need light. Just a moment, there's a power outage here, so we're just trying to get light back so I can read. Incidentally, I'm going to discuss lack of adequate power, in Nigeria, which is one of the handicaps. And this is a typical example. In the middle of this presentation, there's a power outage. Mm-hmm. So just back on, returning to Ritz-Carlton, once a holding ground for the elite, it hosted the FII 9 opening cocktails attended by 21 heads of state and more than 9,000 global participants. The main venue, the King Abdulaziz International Conference Center, pulsed with energy as investors, policymakers, and innovators interacted in a seamless exchange of ideas. It was a gathering of heavyweights because in addition to the 21 heads of state, the summit attracted over 9,000 business leaders and global influencers, including Bill Ackman, CEO of Pershing Square, Jamie Dimon, Chairman and CEO of JP Morgan Chase, Jim Frazier, CEO of Citibank, Lawrence Fink, Chairman and CEO of BlackRock, Patrick Pouyanné, Chairman and CEO of Total Energies, Amin Nasser, President and CEO of Aramco, Yasser Al-Mayan, governor of Public Investment Fund. Also in attendance were Donald Trump Jr. of 1789 Capital, U.S. Deputy Energy Secretary James Danley, WTO Director General Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, Tokyo Governor Yuriko Koike, China's Vice President Han Zheng, and Kirill Dmitriev, the Russian President's Special Envoy. On many occasions, these global power brokers and members of royalty could be seen riding together on golf carts from the Ritz-Carlton to the conference venue, a reminder of the relaxed yet deeply influential nature of the gathering. Africa's own Aliko Dangote, alongside other top investors and leading technology firms such as NVIDIA, Microsoft, and Grok, among countless others, participated actively in the conversations shaped around the theme, the key to prosperity, with over 600 speakers across 250 sessions. FII9 has rightly earned the nickname Davos in the desert. Here, I'm going to do a comparison of FII versus WEF, World Economic Forum, which is Davos. The comparison with the World Economic Forum, WEF, in Davos is inevitable. But unlike Davos, held in the freezing Swiss Alps and often perceived as an inaccessible location to many Africans, FII unfolds under warm Arabian skies and appears far more inclusive. Critics of WEF have long argued that its icy climate either conveniently discourages anti-globalization protesters or inadvertently excludes participants from warmer regions, particularly Africans. Riyadh presents a stark contrast. FII is emerging as a platform where Africa is neither sidelined or ignored. Once again, I apologize. There's another power outage, so just give us a moment. Critics of WEF have long argued that its icy climate either conveniently discourages anti-globalization protesters or inadvertently excludes participants from warmer regions, particularly Africans. Riyadh presents a stark contrast. FII is emerging as a platform where Africa is neither sidelined nor ignored. This shift is refreshing. For decades, Africa was relegated to the role of raw material supplier, a position entrenched by the 1884-1885 Berlin Conference, where European powers partitioned Africa without a single African present. As Nigerians say, it was like shaving a man's head in his absence. The consequences have been severe. Consequences have been severe. African exports raw materials cheaply, which are often processed abroad, mainly in Europe and Asia, creating jobs there only for those finished products to be sold back to Africans at steep prices. The continent's share of global trade remains below 3%. This is why. Take, for instance, crude petroleum products that we produce here. Before Dangote refinery was set up, we were importing so much from Europe. The same thing happens to cocoa, which is produced, whose seed is produced in Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, and Switzerland and the US and Co make all the money, and Germany make all the money from producing chocolates. So how to correct this unfair trade structure is at the heart of my forthcoming book, Africa Exporting Wealth, Importing Poverty. Is Africa sinking or thinking? A new promise, prosperity for all. FII9 theme, prosperity for all, signals a new commitment from Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states to help correct historic inequities. The symbolic key handed to every participant reinforce the message that shared prosperity is the defining global imperative. This shift marks a new way Africa is being viewed and integrated into global economic conversations, just as the fourth industrial revolution accelerates. Before exploring that further, it is useful to briefly outline the four industrial revolutions. Before exploring that further, it's useful to explore the four industrial revolutions. The first is the industrial revolution, which took place between the 60s and 1840s. It was driven by steam power, mechanization, and the transition from manual labor to machines, especially in textile and manufacturing and steam engines. You remember the loom machine, that was invented somewhere in Ireland. The second industrial revolution, 1870s to 1914, It's characterized by mass production, electrification, and assembly lines. Henry Ford's Model T became the defining symbol of this era, just like Tesla's Model T as well in this current era. So the third is the Industrial Revolution, which started between 1960s and the year 2000. That was marked by computers, automation, and the rise of the digital age. Africa experienced only the tail end of that wave, largely through the advent of GSM mobile telephony, which allowed the continent to scale up telecommunication services previously lacking. If you remember, before the introduction of GSM telephones, the entire country had less than 400,000 telephone lines, which was very embarrassing. But with GSM, as a matter of fact, Nigeria has more lines than some European countries right now. Yes. So that is the third. The fourth is where we are right now. The fourth industrial revolution started 2000s to the present time, defined by artificial intelligence, AI, which is what we're going to focus on today. The Internet of Things, IoT, robotics, and the fusion of physical and digital systems. Africa is lagging behind in this because we don't have the infrastructure. And that's what the Davos in the desert, the FI9, addressed on behalf of Africa. So Africa has a long-standing relationship with the Arabian world, dating back to trans-Saharan trade, which started in the 1st to 3rd centuries before nations and cities replaced kingdoms and empires. With the help of beasts of burden like camels, West African empires such as Ghana, Mali, Kano, etc., were linked with the North African market. And with North Africa's proximity to the Arab world, and indeed Saudi Arabia, trade between Africa and Saudi Arabia was booming. The relationship grew steadily between the 7th and 8th centuries due to the growth of Islam, recalled the jihad, which made the routes safer and more organized. The historical visit to Mecca, Saudi Arabia, for pilgrimage by the King Mansa Musa of Mali in West Africa, during which it was reported that he gifted so much gold out in the course of his journey that the price of gold in Egypt, considered at that time as the center of civilization and equivalent of today's financial capitals of the world, such as London, New York, and Shanghai, dropped significantly as a result of the glut in supply triggered by the Mali king's generosity. So it's welcoming that Arabs, the kingdoms of Saudi Arabia in particular, have decided to maintain the historical relationship with Africa in their Vision 2030. Hence, it is reestablishing or consolidating its relationship by factoring Africa into its future development agenda. With Africa now being integrated into this fourth industrial wave, largely propelled by AI, it is encouraging that Saudi Arabia, through FII, is working to position the continent within the global industrial ecosystem. It suggests Africa may no longer be left behind, as it was during the European partition of 1884-1885, nearly 180 years ago, when Africa was divided amongst European countries without an African being at the table. To demonstrate this commitment, their sovereign wealth, valued at approximately $1.15 trillion, launched a new study titled Global Future of Work Report. Its fourth edition focuses specifically on Africa under the subtitle Enabling Africa's Youth in the Age of AI. Somehow, their report confirmed, the information that we have always had, or the humanity has always had about the black man, that the black man has a innate ability to be able to crack codes even without being educated about it. That it comes naturally to him. So Africa's youth in the age of AI. The study examines labor markets in sub-Saharan Africa and the implication of both demographic changes and emerging technologies for the future of work. It is anchored on three key themes. One, sub-Saharan Africa's untapped labor force, turning a demographic dividend into sustainable growth. Two, a technology-first era, how sub-Saharan Africa can leapfrog. Three, pathways to a youthful, productive, AI-enabled workforce. The study was conducted by McKinsey and Company on behalf of FII. The report identifies Africa, home to the world's youngest population, as potential powerhouse for supplying the human talent for the global AI revolution. The continent is being positioned as a future reservoir of AI-related capital. Before focusing on Africa, earlier editions of the FI Future of Work series examined one, labor markets in the Middle East and North Africa, MENA. Under preparing labor markets in MENA for a new technological era. The future of work in Latin America, the future of work in Europe, which explored how developed economies are adopting to AI and amid aging populations, how they are adapting to AI and amid aging population. So you see, before the focus on Africa, they had addressed the same situation in the different continents and parts of the world. So the study on Africa revealed that the continent has the youngest population of, workforce, and they believe that that workforce can be converted into not just workforce for Africa, but global workforce. So the fourth and current edition focuses exclusively on Africa, the world's youngest region, where up to 60% of the population is under age 24, and workforce is projected to reach 800 million by 2020. The workforce from African youths would be 800 million by 2050. That's nearly 1 billion. To achieve its research objectives, a clustering methodology was applied to examine 42 African countries. 7 out of the 49, some say 54 African countries, were excluded due to insufficient data. According to the technical details, the research was designed to capture lived experience. 2 surveys were conducted targeting business leaders and youth to gather insights from both the demand and supply side of the labor market, capturing employers' views on the technology adoption, microeconomic trends, workforce skill readiness, and reskilling efforts, as well as young people's perception on digital transformation. The findings reveal that African youth possess tremendous potential. What stands out most in this Africa Focus report to me is the recognition of Africa's innate capacity to leverage AI for industrial development. Beyond identifying the continent's vast human resources potential, the report signals a long overdue awakening for a region that contributes less than 3% to global trade, which is really embarrassing, and why this finding is very welcome, and African youths have to gear up to become the leaders of AI across the globe. For a continent of 54 nations out of the 195 recognized by the United Nations, this renewed attention is significant. If Saudi Arabia's FII-9 mission is realized, Africa may indeed receive the long-awaited new lease of life it urgently needs. For long, we have been saying that Africa needs trade, not aid. So we really don't that the states of the world are threatening to withdraw aid. We don't mind actually if trade replaces aid, which is something I've written about largely in the past. For example, Saudi Arabia, with a population of roughly 40 million, launched its Vision 2030 agenda in 2016, intending to achieve a $1 trillion economy. According to Yasser Al-Ramayan, governor of the Public Investment Fund in Saudi Arabia is sovereign wealth fund, as we understand it here. The kingdom is set to hit that milestone in its economic report this year. 40 million people. They are planning to hit $1 trillion economy at the end of this year. As a matter of fact, by the time the event was over, they announced that they had hit 1 trillion. Nigeria is planning to hit $1 trillion in the year 2030, and we are 220 million people. We have oil like Saudi Arabia. So that is something significant that we can, if we work hard, if we are focused, we are determined, like the Arabs, we may be able to hit our 30 trillion sooner than later. As Al-Ramayan noted, back in 2015, PIF's assets under management were around 150 billion. That means they're sovereign wealth fund. Today, they are nearly triple that number, and we aim to reach 1 trillion by the end of this year. We are very close. As a matter of fact, like I said earlier, they have already reached it, because by the time the conference was ending at the beginning of this month, they had already disclosed that they had attained the $1 trillion economy. In contrast, Nigeria, estimated at 220 million people, nearly 8 times Saudi Arabia's population, remains a $243 billion economy in 2024, far from its $1 trillion aspiration. Given persistent energy insecurity, achieving a $1 trillion GDP by 2030 looks increasingly unrealistic. And, what has happened in the course of this presentation shows the situation we're in right now. Since we started, there has been power outage twice. And, I wonder how, the economy can attain 1 trillion under these circumstances. We have also written so much about this. So in contrast, Nigeria's 820 million people, nearly 8 times Saudi Arabia's population, remains a 243 billion economy in 2024. Nigeria currently generates only about 12,000 megawatts, but has the capacity to transmit only under 5,000 megawatts of electricity. It's an issue that they have with the transmission company of Nigeria. The GENCOs are generating up to that 12,000, as I just mentioned, but unable to transmit. The transmitting company still belongs to government, and the bureaucracy there and lack of investment in changing old infrastructure, which are, sometimes colonial age, long infrastructure, is hindering the ability to even transmit the 12,000 megawatts that's being produced right now. So that's a major handicap. So 5,000 megawatts electricity is an abysmally low figure that severely hampers industrial takeoff. Without closing this energy gap, the $1 trillion dream risks becoming a mere illusion, unfortunately. A similar pattern of non-optimization of potentials owing to lack of opportunities applies to most African countries, from Kenya in East Africa to Egypt in North Africa, Angola in the Southern African region to Ethiopia, as well as in Eritrea in the Horn of Africa. This concern was echoed by Mr. Tony Lumelu, chairman of UBA and Heirs Holdings. Of course, some of us are aware that Heirs Holdings is a part of the GENCOs. They operate the Ughelli power plant and the Afan power plant in Rivers State. So Mr. Lumelu, who is the chairman, is aware of that challenge. So he spoke on day 2 of the conference during the session titled The Board of Change Makers, Financial Markets. He stressed that while Africa offers vast investment opportunities, unlocking them requires first addressing the continent's crippling energy poverty. Will Saudi Arabia and other nations interested in partnering with Africa for inclusive growth and prosperity seize the moment and help Africa navigate the energy poverty curve to achieve its growth potential? That's $1 billion question. But, so I digress a little bit. What happened in China before China became the powerhouse of the world in terms of production was that they had issues with electricity and power generation and distribution like we had in Nigeria. But they took the bold initiative of developing the Yangtze River into the Three Gorges Dam. Now, from being energy poor, they have excess energy because after the dam, the Yangtze River, which environmentalists kicked against, but at the end of the day, China is benefiting from it. So it's not, our case in Nigeria is not a basket case, because also in India, they had a similar electricity power energy that we are suffering right now, but they resolved it by developing mini grids. So we hope that our leaders will take cue from those two countries and fix the challenge that we face right now. So other prominent African participants at FII9 included WTO Director General Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, Alhaji Aliko Dangote, Africa's richest man, Adebayo Ogunlesi, of course, the chairman of infrastructure projects, the man that is reputed to have bought 2 airports in England, and he's actually also a partner in BlackRock. BlackRock is the biggest investment firm in the world right now. And he made a promise to President Tinubu of Nigeria recently that BlackRock was going to make strategic investments in infrastructure in Nigeria. So also, like I mentioned earlier, Mr. Tony Lumelu was there, and Sim Shabalala, the group managing director of South Africa Standard Bank Group, was also there, and each of them featured in high-level sessions with global economic and political leaders. Nigeria's Minister of State for Industry, Mr. John Eno, also served as a panelist. Rwanda's business-minded President Paul Kagame was among the 21 heads of state present, while Sim Shabalala, as I said earlier, also participated in conclave. The conclave was the part of the program that I was involved in. So the note here that even if Saudi Arabia is tending to be more of a better stomping ground for Africans to be able to take advantage of the resources there to improve the economy as key investors with a lot of funds to invest. Not many Africans were actually in attendance at the FI 9. Most of them are aware of WF, Davos, but they are not aware of the opportunities in the Arabian world. We hope that going forward, with the publicity we're giving to the event in Saudi Arabia right now, that they will be aware that they have to key into it, because we have a long-standing relationship with the Arabian world, which we think we should harness at this point in time. I had the privilege of being selected for the special conclave. The conclave is akin to the conclave of bishops who elect the Pope, tasked with critically examining how Africa can become the global human capital pool for AI deployment. It was a provocative one. The conclave's theme, how can leaders position Africa as the future AI and technology-based talent pool, was intentionally provocative. Like the papal conclave, the mandate was to interrogate without fear or restraint what it would take for Africa to power the world's AI revolution. So I plunged into it. I entered the room determined to spark robust reflections, raising the questions of whether this exercise risks reenacting the historical exploitation of Africa, reminiscent of the 1884-1885 Berlin Conference, where Europe partitioned Africa without African representation. There was immediate pushback from the conclave's co-chair, Professor Yanis Ben Amor, the Executive Director, Center for Sustainable Development, Columbia University. Jawad Khan, Head of Workforce Development, National Development Division of the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Saudi Arabia, and Alice Ruweza, CEO of Agra. They reassured me that no such sinister agenda existed. After that clarification, I reminded the group that Africa has long served not only as a source of raw materials, but also of human resources, most tragically during the transatlantic and trans-Saharan trade. Millions of strong African men and women were forcefully removed, chained, and packed like sardines onto ships bound for Europe, the Caribbean, and the Americas. They built sugarcane plantations in the Caribbean, worked cotton fields in the American South, and laid foundational infrastructure that underpins the wealth of the UK and the US today. Ironically, it is the descendants of these enslaved builders who are now being restricted from migrating through new immigration barriers in some of these same nations, such as the United States of America, where it is reported that President Trump is planning to place a ban on immigration from third world countries, and the UK, where new high walls have been set up, barring a lot of people from going there to have babies and all that and all that. The high walls have been erected to shut out people from the so-called developing world, an unfortunate contradiction to the ideals of inclusivity. This inward-looking posture, driven by the anti-globalization rhetorics in parts of North America and Europe, threatens to polarize a world that works so hard to dismantle Cold War barriers. It also risks leaving entire regions, particularly Africa, behind during the new industrial revolution, just as Africa continues to suffer from climate change impacts. It did little to cause, of course. Africa remains unindustrialized, and the challenges we have with climate today is as a result of greenhouse and all the things that happen to the climate because of manufacturing and gas going into the atmosphere and creating the ozone layer and all that and all that. But Africa is facing the danger of climate change right now more than the countries in the industrialized world that caused it, especially even in the Caribbean and those countries around below sea level, that the condition is so dire that they are afraid of sinking completely. So the leadership contrast between the Western world and the Arabian world. Unlike the increasing exclusionary tone from parts of the global West, Saudi Arabia and the wider Gulf region are demonstrating a commitment to ensuring that no continent is left behind. This ethos is embodied in Vision 2030. Saudi's Vision 2030, a blueprint for inclusive prosperity. Saudi Vision 2020, as detailed in the prosperity book shared with the more than 9,000 FIA participants, is the kingdom's bold roadmap launched by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Abdulaziz in April 2016. Actually, I meant King Mohammed bin Abdulaziz in April 2016. Now, the plan seeks to diversify the economy, reduce dependence on oil, and build a sustainable and globally competitive nation. It rests on three core pillars. One, a vibrant society, improving quality of life, cultural heritage, health, entertainment, and tourism, raising life expectancy to 80 years, strengthening social cohesion. In Africa, I believe life expectancy, averages about 50, 57, but they are aiming for 80 years. A thriving economy, creating jobs, attracting foreign investment, and expanding non-oil sectors such as tourism, mining, logistics, and technology. Targets include raising non-oil revenue to 265 billion, boosting women's workforce participation above 30%, and growing PIF, as I said, the sovereign wealth fund assets to 1.86 trillion. Currently, it's 1.15 trillion by 2030. An ambitious mission, building transparent, digitally enabled governance anchored in strong public-private collaboration. These goals have been implemented through vision realization programs, VRPs, such as the National Transformation Program, the Financial Sector Development Program, and the National Industrial Development and Logistics Program. These frameworks underpin mega projects like NEOM, the Red Sea Tourism Corridor, and large-scale renewable energy. We have lessons to learn in Africa about this. Even if they had Vision 2030, they had to break the vision into small segments, implementable. And that makes it more actionable. If it remains in that big omnibus form, it may be daunting and difficult to move forward, but broken into small pieces like this is easy to implement in piecemeal. That's why they have made a lot of progress, and a lesson that we in Africa have to learn. As of late 2025, roughly 85% of Vision 2030 initiatives are completed or on track. Notable successes include rising home ownership. 65.4% of Saudi Arabians own homes, compared to the situation in Nigeria, where we're talking about, millions of people that have no homes. So the deficit is very high here. Growing female labor force participation, 36% in Q3 2024, and an expanding private sector GDP contribution, 47%, which means apart from oil and gas, that's why I noted in my opening statement that the place is not looking like a hydrocarbon-driven economy anymore. It's now changed to so digitally empowered that the whole atmosphere is changing. And here is reported that about 47% of the GDP is from the private sector. Having achieved major strides in transitioning from a hydrocarbon-based economy to a technology-driven one, Saudi Arabia aims to become a global beacon, especially for Africa, with which it shares deep historical ties. Speaking at FII 9, the Saudi ambassador to the US, Princess Rima Bandar Al Saud, reaffirmed Vision 2030's ethos. Unquote, by uniting these principles with unwavering commitment and creating global partnerships like those forged here at FII, we can build a future where prosperity is not a privilege, but a universal reality, where no one is left behind, end of quote. Saudi Arabia's finance minister, Mohammed bin Abdullah Al Jaddan, echoed this message. Unquote, globally, progress requires intensive cooperation, not only between nations, but also with international organizations. In our interconnected world, we all have a stake in helping other nations achieve stability and growth. He added, our goal must be to build a future where progress is not just the privilege of a few, but the right of all. So this underpins my point that Saudi Arabia is pivoting towards Africa. They want to help the rest of the world, but in particular, they want to help Africa, not just because they want to help Africa. Africa is actually the new frontier where growth can take place. So they are looking at investing in Africa, partnering with Africans, which is what Africans must take seriously and find ways to engage with them. Comparing global development platforms. Saudi Arabia's FII is not the only global initiative shaping development trajectories. China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, and Europe's World Economic Forum, WEF, Davos, in the Swiss Alps also play significant roles. A brief comparison between both of them provides perspective. One, World Economic Forum in Europe influences policy. WEF shapes global policies, fosters public-private dialogue, and connects African stakeholders to European markets. It promotes initiatives such as the $150 billion billion euro global gateway. Its influence is indirect, primarily through reports, agenda setting, and partnerships. That's quite unlike the situation with the FI. The Europeans are not throwing in money, but they're just creating contacts and platforms and connections. Two, Future Investment Initiative, which is FI, driven by Saudi Arabia. They are deploying capital. FI directly deploys capital. Saudi Arabia has committed $25 billion in development loans and financing. It has also issued 700 million to industrial zones across more than 14 African countries, targeting infrastructure, agriculture, and renewable energy. These are concrete job-creating investments. China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, is infrastructure powerhouse. BRI is the largest in scale. China has, one, invested over 60 billion in more than 40 African nations. Two, it has driven Africa-China trade to 280 billion in 2024. Three, financial railway sports. It has financed railway sports, power plants, and digital infrastructure. BRI remains the primary driver behind Africa's recent infrastructure boom. You are aware they are investing in Nigeria, investing in Ethiopia, investing in practically everywhere, 40 nations as this report states. But which of these investment forums or platforms benefits Africa the most? That question is answered here. Measured by investment volume and completed projects, BRI leads, followed by Saudi Arabia's FII, with WEF playing an important but less financially impactful role. Saudi Arabia's involvement is especially noteworthy, considering its population of just 40 million compared to China's 1.3 billion. As such, the Gulf state is punching far above its democratic weight and its commitment to Africa. We all know the consequences of China's investments recently, the sovereign guarantees and the assets and what they're doing in Djibouti and so many other countries where they have defaulted in repayment. So that's something that we have to look at, that the funds that are bringing in have implications. So that's what the issue is. So to stretch it further, the United States of America under Bill Clinton's watch in 2000, introduced the African Growth and Opportunities Act, and which brought some items to the U.S. tariff-free. Although the outcome of the policy has been mixed, the current tough U.S. selective tariff regime appears to have nullified it. When Trump introduced this policy, I think it's one of the reasons why they called, President Clinton introduced this policy in the year 2000. I think it's one of the reasons why he was referred to as the blackest American president, because it was a policy that was going to aid Africans, but the result has been mixed. And we don't know whether it's continuing because of the new tariff regime. Today's leaders must negotiate partnerships. They must, if we must move forward, because Africa is now at a crossroads. The strong interest from global powers confirms Africa's status as the world's next frontier of growth, innovation, and labor. It is now up to African leaders not to repeat the mistakes of their predecessors, who were absent from the negotiating table during the infamous 1884-1885 Berlin Conference, where Africa was partitioned. Today's leaders in Africa must negotiate partnerships, much as Arab nations negotiated with Europe and America for the exploitation of their oil reserves without surrendering their cultural values of sovereignty. That's why today there's no democracy in the Arab world. There's still monarchy that's operating there. Yet they are making a lot of progress, and their culture has remained pristine. They still dress in the way they dress. They still, maintain their religion. So everything is intact, except the oil and gas that they are using Western technology to explore. That's contrary to what is happening in Africa. So we must be aware of that, learn from the Arab world what they did to be able to maintain their culture, their values, and still develop the resources that they have. In contrast, African societies were compelled to abandon much of their cultural heritage and adopt Western standards, creating a psychological inferiority complex that still hampers the continent. Yet, Africa continues to power the world. Despite the structural challenges, Africa, especially Nigeria, continues to supply medical professionals to Europe and the Middle East. The Gulf region in particular has long relied on African doctors, nurses, and technicians, thanks to geographic proximity and long-standing ties. As I stated earlier, the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa, you know, they are close to one another, and so the ties are there. We have been cooperating and working together, you know, for a very long time, and you know, it's the both continents have been quite good beneficiaries of the long ties. As a matter of fact, there are conspiracies that back in the days, the Saudis used to come to Nigeria, to University of Ibadan hospital for medical treatments and stuff like that. So similarly, Africans with modern technology skills, especially in information technology, have migrated globally to drive innovation. We all know about the Japa syndrome, that a lot of Nigerians and Africans that in general are all over the world right now rendering services. As you may recall, this syndrome, this activity, this action did not start now. Over 40 years ago, Nigerian doctors, nurses have been going to the Middle East. I recall my senior sister who moved to Oman as a nurse some 40 years ago. But just recently that this whole phenomenon started going around the entire world. This underlines an important point. The idea of Africa as a reservoir of talent is not new. It is real, proven, and scalable. The question is whether this time Africa will negotiate from a position of strength and ensure that the partnership of the AI era are mutually beneficial rather than extractive as they were centuries ago. It is because the Arabs did not negotiate from position of weakness. Hence, their culture, religion, and lifestyle have remained pristine despite their interactions with the West, as I stated earlier. One was amazed that some members of the conclave of accomplished scholars, bankers, technology enthusiasts, and technocrats argued that Africa should not engage in the AI race simply because the continent is still ravaged by poverty, has a high number of out-of-school children, and is burdened by various diseases. They argue that addressing these misfortunes should be prioritized over competing in the AI arena. I was shocked because if we don't compete and get involved now, we will lose out like we lost out in the previous industrial revolutions. So as a counterpoint, I reminded the audience that the United States and China, both leaders in the AI race, also have significant populations living in poverty and facing diseases. The streets of Washington, D.C., New York, Los Angeles, and other major American cities are filled with extremely poor people existing in the midst of vast opulence. The same is true for China. Although about 300 million people have been lifted out of poverty in the past 2 decades, millions of very poor citizens remain. One only needs to travel outside major cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou into the hinterlands to witness the grim levels of deprivation. Realizing that it will be unable to compete directly with China and the US, the two leading AI powers, Saudi Arabia has instead carved out a niche in providing the highly capital-intensive data centers required for AI-driven information storage. It did not stop there. It has also recently staked $1 trillion in AI investments in the USA. You remember a couple of weeks ago, the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, was in the White House where he made these pledges. So as such, it will benefit from 2 ends of the AI spectrum. I mean, Saudi Arabia is going to benefit from 2 ends of the spectrum because it's investing in data centers and computing as a passive investor. It is therefore gratifying that through its Global Future of Work report, with this edition focused on Africa, Saudi Arabia has helped the continent of Africa identify its comparative advantage, empowering Africa's youth for the for the age of AI. So it's been established. It's not a hunch. It's not a guesswork. Africa has strong potentials to become the operators or service providers in AI across the world. Doing the health sector now, which just came by chance, but this time we have the opportunity to structure it so that we can benefit from it directly. So it is left for African leaders and people to convert the revelation and discovery to a niche as the Saudis have done. Saudis found a niche in providing data centers. So it's been identified by research through McKinsey that we have strong ability and capacity to be the AI service providers, technicians, technical people across the world. So we should take advantage of that discovery. In the final analysis, it is encouraging that Africa is finally on the verge of playing a critical role as the much vaunted new frontier of global development. This momentum has been boosted by Saudi Arabia's FII, underscoring the fact that leaders in the Gulf region, Saudi Arabia in particular, do not make plans to grow in isolation. Their vision is underpinned by inclusive progress and shared prosperity for humanity. The vigor with which they implement their vision is also a vital lesson from African leaders, which African leaders must urgently internalize. Although African leaders have also crafted the future development plans, similar to King Abdulaziz and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's Vision 2030, introduced in 2016, most of these plans across Africa were not sustained and largely remain unimplemented. Take Nigeria, for example. It once had Vision 2020, but most of its goals were not achieved in the deliberate and disciplined manner seen in Saudi Arabia. Records show that many African nations have drawn up development plans comparable to Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030. Examples include Ghana's Vision 2020, which aimed to make Ghana a developed country between 2020 and 2029, and a newly industrialized one between 2030 and 2039. Rwanda's Vision 2050, which seeks to transform Rwanda into a high-income economy by 2050. South Africa's National Development Plan, NDP, outlining development goals up to 2030. Egypt's Vision 2030 aimed at transforming the country into a knowledge-based economy and improving citizens' living standards. Morocco's Vision 2025, designed to make the country a competitive and innovative economy. With these plans, while these plans look commendable on paper, most countries, except perhaps Rwanda, have failed to execute them with consistency and vigor. Unsurprisingly, Rwanda's president, Mr. Paul Kagame, was the only African head of state in attendance at FII 9 in Riyadh, which held from 27th to 30th October. One of the major reasons African leaders are unable to implement long-term plans with the same consistency as their Gulf counterparts lies in the differing systems of government. The monarchical system in the Arab world guarantees long, stable leadership tenures. The current Saudi king has been on the throne for about 10 years, since 2015, with the crown prince effectively steering national transformation since 2022. That's 3 years ago. In contrast, democratic system in Africa impose strict term limits. Leaders usually serve only 2 terms of 4 or 5 years, giving them limited time to execute long-term plans. In Nigeria, for instance, we had the challenge of Obasanjo, President Olusegun Obasanjo, who, after his 2 terms, was suspected to be intending to serve a 3rd term, but the constitutional term limitation prevented him from doing so. And there are schools of thought that if he had stayed to do a 3rd term, maybe he would have been able to implement some of the policies that he started that got reversed, by the government that succeeded him, even if it was from the same political party. Such are the challenges that we face with the system of government that we operate right now. The monarchical system in the Arab world guarantees long, stable leadership tenures. The current Saudi king has been on the throne for about 10 years, as I stated earlier, with the crown prince effectively steering national transformation since 2022. In contrast, the democratic system in Africa impose strict terms. Leaders usually serve only 2 terms of 4 or 5 years, giving them limited time to execute long-term visions. Unlike monarchs, democratic leaders lack the long horizon needed to implement multi-decade development agendas, I have stated earlier. Although Kagame of Rwanda is a democratically elected leader, in practice, he functions almost like a monarch, having been at the helm for about 25 years, since April 2000. That's why he's effectively in his fourth term, which explains his ability to plan long-term and execute with continuity. As I said, only Rwanda seems to be the country in Africa that has been able to implement his vision. His own vision is Vision 2050, and we all know the strides that Kagame has made. It has become a model to a lot of us, and that's because he was able to remain in government consistently. Now, there's a question that the situation poses: inability to stay long term. It raises a provocative question. Between democracy and monarchy, which system is better suited for development in emerging economies? That question is necessary because what may work for industrialized Western nations may not be ideal for African countries where monarchical structures were traditionally cultural and consensual, unlike Western type democracy, which is often imposed and therefore difficult to internalize. What is clear in visioning for development between African leaders and their Gulf region counterparts is that leaders in the Arab world not only plan, but also implement diligently. This is the overarching reason, the overarching reason for their continent's consistent development trajectory. For instance, to ensure that Vision 2030 was properly executed, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman engaged Richard Attias, CEO of the FI Institute, to drive implementation. Attias, originally from Morocco, reinforces the long-standing historical ties between Saudi Arabia and Africa. As I said earlier, there's an affinity between the Arabian world and Africa. And so we've been working with them over a very long time through the trans-Saharan trade and every other thing. And now in these modern days, you can see that it was easy for Saudi Arabia to engage Richard Attias, who was part of WF, to help them implement their vision. What is clear in visioning for development between African leaders and their Gulf region counterparts is that leaders in the Arab world will not only plan, but also implement diligently, as I said earlier. This is the overarching reason for their consistent development trajectory. For instance, to ensure that Vision 2020 was properly executed, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Laden engaged with Attias, CEO of FI Institute, to drive implementation. Attias, originally from Morocco, reinforces the long-standing historical ties between Saudi Arabia and Africa. Whether by coincidence or deliberate design, this engagement validates the fact that Arab world has historically sourced human and material resources from Africa, whether through the trans-Saharan trade centuries ago or through modern recruitment practices, as demonstrated by Attias' involvement. His role has been significant in shaping Saudi Arabia's mission to diversify its economy and expand its global partnerships. Attias, as I said earlier, is a former senior figure at World Economic Forum. He was approached in 2017 by the Crown Prince to create a global platform for investors, which eventually evolved into the FI Institute. It is a credit to the Crown Prince's vision that he sought expertise beyond his immediate circle to ensure world-class execution. In his welcome remarks at FI 9 on October 30, Attias acknowledged the presence of the CEO of the World Economic Forum, while underscoring how formidable FI has become and the need for more cooperation globally for the common good of all. I quote, "Every society is asking the same question: how can we build a future that is more sustainable, inclusive, and humane?" And speaking of inclusion, FI is so inclusive this year that we even welcomed the president of WEF. We thought it was time he came to see for himself that we are not in the desert anymore. Although my personal wish is for the next FI, its 10th edition, to be held in Nigeria. It is scheduled for Tokyo, Japan. Hopefully, after Japan, Africa, perhaps Nigeria, will have the opportunity to host FI 11 in 2027, where Africa can take advantage of the opportunities in the Arabian world to invest in fast-growing environment and the world's next good frontier. African countries have much to learn from Saudi Arabia without resilience and bold decision-making. African countries have much to learn from Saudi Arabia about how resilience and bold decision-making can make visions come true. The governor of Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, Sovereign Wealth Fund, and chairman of FI, Yasser Al-Ramayan, captured it best. Unquote, "To me, prosperity is the ability to look 50 years ahead and envision a society that's healthier, more educated, more innovative, and more connected than it is today. A society where every person feels they have a stake in its success." End of quote. One can hazard a guess that such an exclusive approach is among the reasons religious fundamentalism has significantly declined in Saudi Arabia compared to the dark days associated with Osama bin Laden, the alleged mastermind of September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks in the United States of America. The decision by Saudi Arabia's new leadership under the Crown Prince to purge corruption and compel the recovery of excessive wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, redistributing it for the broader good is an extraordinary leadership lesson. African leaders, many of whom, as earlier stated, are sometimes wealthier than the nations they govern, must emulate such patriotism, selflessness, and forward thinking. This kind of transformation leadership is what has enabled the Crown Prince reform to reposition Saudi Arabia at the center of new global partnerships that redefine progress in the age of intelligence, not merely in statistics, but in lived experience. Only last week, Africa descended further down the democratic ladder as another military coup was staged in Guinea-Bissau, reversing hard-won democratic gains. So Guinea-Bissau has now joined the widening club of military-led states, including Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Guinea, Sudan, Chad, Gabon. Almost 8 to 9 countries in Africa now, of the 54 countries, are led by despots, which is unfortunate. This development raises a critical question. Are African countries becoming frustrated with democracy, which is alien to their traditions, and gravitating back toward monarchical or authoritarian system historically practiced by their ancestors? This is, a very deep question. From my study, I had to look at it critically. Instead of just condemning these countries for overturning democracy, we should look at what the root cause really is. Whether these systems that are being operated, it's a question that we should look at. We shouldn't continue with one story narrative. We should look at all sides of the coin to see what really is going on. This development raises a critical question. Are African countries becoming frustrated with democracy, which is alien to their traditions, and gravitating back towards monarchical or authoritarian systems historically practiced by their ancestors? Is the tenured nature of democracy, where leaders lack the time to plan and execute long-term strategies like Saudi Arabia's Vision 2020, hindering Africa's progress? Those concerns need to be interrogated for full understanding to identify and chart the way forward for the best leadership system that's ideal for Africa. Would it be best to sustain the borrowed democratic system or return to the system practiced by our ancestors who ruled successfully over empires and kingdoms such as Mali or Yorkane Bolu, Kano, Benin, spreading across the continent until the Europeans invaded in 264 to 146 BCE, when the Romans conquered parts of the North Africa, to be specific, Carthage in modern-day Tunisia. After all, the essence of leadership is good governance, and the ultimate goal is progress and shared prosperity. So in Saudi Arabia, they are practicing monarchical systems, and they are making progress. As Professor Tony Chan, former president of King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, observed, in quote, prosperity can mean different things to different people. A good reference is the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. We are aware of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. He explained, further quoting him, for the poor in developing nations, prosperity means achieving SDGs 1, 3, and 6. And this entails no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, and clean water and sanitation. 2, for the middle class, priority shifts to SDGs 4, 5, 7, and 8. These are quality education, gender equality, affordable and clean energy, and decent work and economic growth. For the next level, for leaders in developed nations, prosperity emphasizes SDGs 9, 11, 16, and 17. And this cover industry, innovation, infrastructure, sustainable cities, peace, justice, and strong institutions and partnerships. For those focused on social and environmental issues, SDGs 10, 12, 13, and 15 are key. And these are reduced inequalities, responsible consumption, climate action, and life on land. As illuminating as his explanation was, Professor Chan lamented, in quote, unfortunately, humanity is far from achieving any of these 17 goals, end of quote. He concluded by emphasizing that achieving prosperity for all, as envisioned by FI and Saudi Arabia's outreach to the world, requires compromise, sacrifice, and leadership across all segments of society. With such clarity on the global prosperity ladder, it is evident where Africa sits, at the bottom of the pyramid, requiring urgent support and inclusive global partnerships. In my view, this is precisely what Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 conveys. How to rescue Africa by including it in global development plans by the superpowers, as Saudi Arabia has done, is a task that must be done at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for thinking with this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Magozoimbe. Thank you very much indeed. I have picked up a lot of things, and I hope others have picked up a lot of things as well. Well, some of them are quite controversial, I must say, immediately. But I am going to yield the floor for the next speaker. I understand Professor Cristiano Dos is not online now. I'm going to yield the floor to our next panelist. That's you, brothers, who I'm going to introduce now. I hope he's set. Yeah, I can see you there, brother. So start unmuting yourself because you're going next. Our next speaker is Dr. Bravos Kayosa. He possesses over 5 years combined experience in economic policy, development management, econometric analysis, and project management. And he has experience as a scholar, a strategic analyst, and has worked with various media houses analyzing economic and policy development. He's currently a student of media communication at the Institute, and the profile is that of an international analyst. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in Economics, Master of Science in Economic Policy and Project Management, and PhD in Econometrics. Dr. Kayosa is a qualified analyst with strong analytical skills and confident personality. So no pressure at all. Come around confidently and let's speak to you. Thank you very much. So the floor is yours, Bravos.
Thank you, Professor Kila, for that beautiful introduction. I would also take this opportunity to thank our first presenter, Magnus Onyibe. He has given a wonderful talk. And I think my work will be easy because Onyibe has dived well into the matters of concern as far as Africa is concerned when it comes to its relations with the rest of the world, in this case, Saudi Arabia. So I will discuss his presentation in three aspects. Number one is on development, on the development concept as a whole, from what he has ably told us, I think, in terms of where we have been, where we are today, and of course, where we have to be going. And I think listening Mr. Magnus Onyibe, I get a sense of what has been at the center of African development. And I think it has been a question of transition from natural resources, which we are endowed, to economic resources. We are having a lot of natural resources, from minerals to oils to resources that attract, for example, tourism, water bodies, and the rest. But it has been a struggle, we all agree, of a transition from natural resources from those natural resources to give them economic value, thereby turning them into economic resources, as Saudi Arabia has done from its endowments. And I think to break from, or to have a clear and a beneficial transition, it is quite clear that we have to learn from what other people have done. But of course, it is important, again, to point to a number of areas that have extracted from the beautiful presentation by Magnus. And I would like to address one by one, but allow me not to start from really from the macro. I mean, from the technical macroeconomic variables, but I would like to start with what has been missing, given what is happening on the continent, and given what has happened in Saudi Arabia in the last few years. For example, when you talked about corruption, when I was talking about decisiveness in terms of implementing what they had planned to implement. I think the problem with Africa today is that macroeconomic management has sidelined the political aspect of economics. What I want to say here is the governance question that Mr. Magnus ended with. Any student of macroeconomics will tell you that it is unlikely to achieve substantial progress economically if there is, or in the absence of, political stability and rule of law. And I think this is what is ailing us, has given us examples of what is the state of affairs in Africa, for example, in terms of the coups, but in terms of lack, for example, of transparency, lack of democracy. And he is posing a serious question. Should it be about Western democracy, or should we be thinking differently? And I think this is one major question that, as we learn from others, and Magnus has centered on the question: is it? I think Magnus is inviting us to ask ourselves the following questions. Number one, should it be about development or democracy? Or what should start, if there is such a thing? Should it be? Should we go with democracy first, and then we go, and then development follows, or should we focus on development and then democracy will come maybe later? And I think this is what you would call the West democracy fatigue in Africa, and it has to be dealt with. And my thinking is that maybe from what we have listened from Magnus, examples he has given, what has happened, for example, under the prince in Saudi Arabia, examples might be from President Kagame and the rest, is that I think Africa needs a new age of kings. And when I say the new age of kings, I don't mean tyrants. From what is happening, and I must admit that I've learned a lot from Magnus's presentation as far as Saudi Arabia is concerned. What I'm learning is that kings are preoccupied by power, but power as a means to an end. Unlike tyrants who consider power as an end itself. And when that is the case, what we are seeing is that kings will always focus to the legacy that is not only productive to the generation, to the existing generation, but to the future generations. And I think maybe Africa needs to interrogate that question. And as I'm saying that when we think about this question, when I'm talking about kings, I'm talking about tyrants, and this is because of the following reasons. Number one is that it is increasingly becoming clear that the continent needs efficiency over democratic idealism, and for the most, I think in many years now, what has transpired on the continent is that democratic idealism has taken space as far as our government architectures are concerned, and they have, which is bereft of efficiency, and that has had dangerous, I must say, consequences to the populace, and therefore that dichotomy of efficiency and democratic idealism is worth of our discussions, because again it is becoming detrimental to the very existence of these states. Whereas we say we have democratic values, we have periodic elections. You find in most of these countries in Africa, even that basic rule that a nation is a daily plebiscite is even lacking, as we have seen in the recent recent elections, for example, in East Africa, in Tanzania, what has happened, and for example in Uganda, what is transpiring. Number two, the continent itself, because of being endowed with these natural resources, the process itself of democratization has become what Socrates called suicidal empathy. In its in itself, the process itself necessarily enshrines. Of course, I know people will argue that maybe it's not the case as it is happening in other countries, but it enables evils like corruption to sustain the same regimes, if I may say so, or the same structures of governance. And when push comes to shove, when citizens start questioning these structures because they are not helping them, they are not beneficial to them, what has always happened is that the pushback from these governments has been two ways. Number one is that within the democratic spaces itself, leaders or rulers have decided to use the same resources to accommodate themselves, what we could call self-preservation, by maybe selling these resources to the rest of the world, not concomitant to the value that these resources would have driven. Number two, that necessarily the ruling class maintains a certain level of goodies to the public, but which are not necessarily transforming their lives. And when macroeconomists or economists come into play, what they normally focus on is the same problem that was written in 2001 by William Astley, of what he called the elusive quest for growth, a study that was sponsored by the World Bank. And in here, the preoccupation has been that if we have more investment, if we do what we call the financing gap, to bridge the gap between domestic saving and required investment. So they think that if we have a lot of investments, if we have, if, for example, today, if we build these infrastructures, regardless of where these resources are coming from, the thinking has been that we will end up into turning these countries into prosperity. But that has terribly failed because of the governance architecture. It is not always that this gap between domestic saving and the required investment has been at for the benefit of the citizens. Actually, what has happened that we have experienced GDP. I call GDP expansion, not GDP growth, because growth would mean transformation of what Arthur Lewis had described in 1950s. That it has not to be expansion; it has to be transformation. That transformation has not happened simply because of the governance architecture that we are having. I understand that again, kings can turn into tyrants, but I think it's better when one king turns into a tyrant than when you are having a democracy that can turn into a big number of tyrants, and like what we are seeing today. And therefore, whereas we are so obsessed on the continent with macroeconomic management, a plethora of evidence has shown that it can't be a way to go when we have the existing democratic structure, which is increasingly becoming not reliable when it comes to delivering to the people. Secondly, before I go to that point, so I summarize my point to that. I think it is high time when we have the new age of kings in Africa. In Saudi Arabia, I'm not saying that there are no problems, but from what we are learning, I think from Saudi Arabia, that I think we need to think or to rethink this kind of democratic dispensation, and of course, it is now clear that there is that fatigue of Western democracy, and of course, it hasn't delivered as we would have expected. Number two, I'd like to talk about now the macroeconomic variables. Even when I talked about the first thing on political stability and rule of law, I don't mean that we should discard, because we can't afford to discard the management of our economy in a very smart way. And I would like to pick some issues that have been well put forward by our first presenter. I think number one is it is clear that the youth problem in Africa has to be dealt with, and initiatives like future investment initiative are the center of that on how we can deal with this problem. And number one is about it. I think it will always boil down to how do we make young people in Africa have jobs, and because the economies, because of what is happening in the space of the digital economy, as he has well explained, it will be much more about what we'd call the gig economy. So the formal employment, the traditional, the conventional way of the economy is absorbing people is running out of town. What is becoming clear is that young people, mad people, not only the young, will not depend on traditional, conventional ways of employment. They will have to move from one space to the other, and it is not easy to afford their lives depending on a particular kind of a job. And AI will be helping to do that. And the question here is that because wage employment has been the cog in terms of giving people livelihood, this, of course, will now bring out a new dimension. As we speak today, wage employment is 24%, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, and our education system still believes on this approach that wage employment now will be wage employment is at the center of absorbing many people that go through the education system. But at 24%, what we are seeing is a serious problem. And this portends that there will be a more serious problem, because now necessarily that won't be a factor when it comes to how we measure employment. And that requires a more serious way of making sure that many young people will be absorbed in the gig economy, but with the required skills from what Mr. Magnus has helped us enlighten. So that's on unemployment. And then I would like to talk about on growth, productivity, and the capital. And I was happy when he talked about the World Economic Forum as opposed to FII, as opposed to BRI. And I do agree that Saudi Arabia is well positioned to offer the new Saudi relief in terms of making sure that productivity, which now would be centering not only on financial capital, but in terms of skills that come with the current industrial revolution we are in, but also in terms of giving a leeway. I think I've given a green light on the already existing capital to be pre-productive. We have invested a lot in infrastructure capital in terms of things that make people get productive will largely depend on how well Africans are equipped in terms of technology. But it's also important to say that productivity and capital will be not that enough if growth, substantial growth, so to speak, will not be grown. What we have experienced in the last 20 years or so, you have 14 years of the last 20 years in Africa, which has been associated with GDP growth, but with low productivity. And one of the areas that the required skills to make these resources become more productive because of value, lack of value addition has been a stumbling block when it comes to real growth, as President Museveni calls it. And I think that will be one of the areas where the relations between Africa and Saudi Arabia will be of immense power. Another area I think is also on capital, not now as a function of productivity and growth, but capital as
5 minutes, Bravios. You have 5 minutes.
Yes. Okay, Prof. Capital decentralization. I think capital has been centered at the center. If you go across Africa, it's all about the cities, it is about the towns. But the main question we have to be asking ourselves is, where are our people? I think many people are still in villages, and we have to make sure that we have the digital, for example, infrastructure to make sure that these young people can access capital as the factors of production. And lastly, it's about the deficit he has talked about on energy. And I think from my seat, I think energy sits at the center of everything problematic with the African economies. We need to deal with the energy deficit. And I think through the energy deficit, we can deal with food deficit and also value addition deficit. Because if we manage to beat or to contain this deficit, it is clear that even the ballooning of African public debts will eventually reduce, and then we'll be able to make more people absorbed in the economies. Lastly, I'd like to say thank you for this time, to have a time to say something about a good presentation by Magnus. And next time, I think Mr. Magnus will invite us also to be the conclave. I'd love to be there in the near future. Thank you so much, Professor Anton Kila.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you, everybody. Unfortunately, we started late and we haven't got a lot of time. But we're going to steal just about 15 minutes more because I want to treat a couple of questions to both speakers. So if you're taking notes, this is fine. In his lead presentation, Magnus Onyibe did something that I won't allow to get away with. He didn't say it, but implicitly outlined the possibility of the correlation between continuous leadership of one man in Rwanda and the possible success. And my question to him is that, how will he justify? I mean, has he not got the fear of legitimacy for untenured leadership? That that risk is there. My economic question to Bravios after Magnus Onyibe speaks is that he talks about he talks about two things in economics, among the many things he said. One is the disconnect between GDP activity and fiscal growth. In a way, the difference between Main Street and Wall Street, financial growth not terminating reality, and the
energy deficit in Africa, which I think will also include infrastructure deficit. So my question to him is this: how does Africa make itself attractive? What is its very 1 minute proposal for Africa to make itself attractive, even within that that gap of GDP and activity, energy and infrastructural deficit? So we start with Magnus again.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
With the last question, the connectivity between lived experience and the growth of GDP. As you know, as a professor and as an economist, you know that there's always a lag between GDP growth and lived experience of the people. It's a difficulty in the world of economics that's been established for a very long time. And, simple analogy I'll give for us in Africa, because we are football enthusiasts. Let's take Nigeria as an example. It took almost a decade for the time that one of the first few football coaches that came to Nigeria to recruit footballers for Nigeria to become a leading country in football. When Westerhoff or another coach before him came to Nigeria, to recruit Nigerians to play in Europe and everywhere, a lot of Nigerians were complaining that why were we bringing in a foreign coach? And they didn't see the benefits for 2 years, 3 years. But in a period of less than 10 years, Nigeria won the football tournament in Atlanta, the Olympic, the global gold standard. So it took time for when the initiative was taken and when it materialized. So there's a lag, there's a gestation period. So that is a fact that we must recognize, that when the GDP figures are saying something, it will take time for the lived experience, reality, to catch up with the GDP figures. And it takes consistency. And as I said, it looks like it takes like at least half a decade, maybe a decade. And, our leaders don't have a decade from the way it is right now. We're practicing democracy that election takes place every 4 years. So even when a leader is doing 8 years, it may not be enough time for seeds that are planted to germinate and begin to bear fruit. That's practical. It's not based on any fundamentals, any rules in economics right now, but I'm talking about the reality. That's what's happening. The pattern that the Western world took to develop is different from what's happening right now. Until not long ago, the American presidential system of government was not tenured. Some of the leaders that need to do the heavy lifting at that time were there for longer than 2 tenures. So they have passed that growth era that they needed to grow, to leapfrog, and they needed consistency in one person being in power, because they didn't have the sturdy institutions that they have right now. We have weak institutions that would not enable consistency after somebody leaves power. Look at it. Take example, for instance. Take, for instance, in the United States of America, where President Donald Trump right now is working very hard to undo the Obamacare. This is a democracy. This is the leading democracy in the world. This is the United States of America. Even a current president is working very hard to undo a structure that has been put in place by another president. How much more in Africa, where there's no institution? That challenge is there. So the gestation period for policies to happen, to unravel, to materialize, is the challenge that we have to deal with. And like I said, the king of Saudi Arabia right now has been there for like 10 years. And their plan is just beginning to materialize. This is the phase at which they really want to break out, to invest in other climes. And that's why, as I said earlier, that nation is not being seen as a hydrocarbon-driven nation anymore. They are breaking out. They are looking for where to invest their money beyond their sovereign wealth fund, which is about 1.15 trillion, and they aim to become 1.86 trillion or thereabouts. So they're looking to invest in different places. They are diversifying the economy. So that's just one aspect. The second aspect that Prof mentioned, it's with regards um, to monarchies becoming tyrannical. That's a challenge that we have to face. We even see democracies where the leaders have become tyrannical. Take Cameroon, for instance. The leader has been there forever and he was elected. Paul Kagame, that I cited as an example, was elected and is there. We know what's going on in other countries apart from Rwanda. You know, we have the country where some of the presidents have been there for 30 years and more. So, and they're elected. So, democracy is not a sure bet that the leaders will not become tyrannical. It's not a sure bet that they will also not be sit tight. You know, look at what happened in Zimbabwe with Mugabe until he left not long ago. Look at, you know, there are so many countries in Africa where elected or democratic system where people are, where leaders are elected are in operation. Yet, you know, those people, those leaders are tyrannical. So practicing democracy is not a guarantee. So there can also be countries where there are monarchies, where, you know, the leaders are monarchical by nature and they are not tyrannical. And in instances where they are tyrannical, there are embedded structures in Africa where such leaders can be removed. They can be removed as they did in sometime in Morocco, in so many countries. In fact, rooted in African culture is leaders that are aberrant are made to kill themselves, you know, and stuff like that. So those things worked for us and we're able to develop. But this tenure of 4 years, 5 years, as it has turned out practically, citing living example, to me, it's not long enough. So it's something we have to interrogate. It's not something that I'm absolute about, but I'm saying that it's something that we have to look at and see the options that would help us get out of this quagmire that we seem to be facing. So it's something that should be challenged. Then on the third point, I can't remember the third point that, yes.
The third point is how to make Africa attractive, notwithstanding its gap and its deficit.
Absolutely. Africa is the new frontier. Prof, you know that. And we have been touting it. But we have to make it an investable destination by de-risking it. The risk right now is the kind of challenge that we face. When I was making my presentation, there was power outage twice. So power is very critical. Once we have power, we can do a lot of things. I cite another example with Nigeria. The government just came out with a policy, I think I just passed, that 30% of our raw materials have to be processed here. That our raw materials have to process 30% here before it's exported. Our sesame seed is in high demand, apart from our crude oil, our cocoa, our gold, our lithium, and everything else. So our policy now is such that, you know, it has to be processed up to 30% before it can go out. Those are ways that we can make Africa become more attractive. Because if we de-risk those things, like the big challenge that we have, which is electricity, power, a lot of things will change. So we need to do that. The rest of the world have identified Africa as the next good frontier. And, you know, when something similar happened in China, the solution was that, you know, after 25 years of no relationship with China between the US, after the nuclear, bomb, and stuff like that, Richard Nixon, president of the US, visited China and made
China visible
and made China visible, opened the door for a new era, which President Jimmy Carter followed up with. And the American government made conscious effort to begin to invest in China and leave manufacturing to China while they concentrate on the service industry. And that gave China the boost. The US and the rest of the world need to come to Africa and make such strategic investment that will remove the risk of lack of electricity, and it will become very attractive again.
Okay, let's go to you, brothers. But I want emphasis more on your side on what Africa should be doing to make itself. So reduce the risk is the thing, and then make itself readable. Like, from the economists to brothers, let's get some things more. What should we be doing?
I think number one, Africa has to reassess the way it manages or it measures its economic growth. I think this business of GDP growth,
Yes.
which I call GPDism, must be scrutinized. And of course, I would like to be extreme on this. It must end. GDP expansion is not equal to betterment of people's lives. It does not reduce inequality, and therefore, again, does not make conducive environment generally for more investments from the rest of the world. Because if you have GDP growing, as we always say, but you have a lot of people remaining in abject poverty, that is dangerous. Number two is that I think there is a debate I know in Africa about population growth. But Professor Kila and Magnus, we may have this debate the next day. I don't buy the argument that Africa must reduce its population. I think Africa must deal with the first question I'm raising. It has to get it clear. For example, if you go to Saudi Arabia today and borrow, for example, I'm giving just an example, $5 billion US and inject it in African economy, what will happen in the next 3-4 years from the accounting GDP principles? Economy will have grown regardless of the sectors that absorb a lot of people on the continent. And that means even if you increase producers or you bring more investors, you have the population that is not able to absorb whatever that is being produced, and that will not help more investment because there is no aggregate demand. But what you have to do then, if you have, for example, Tanzania population growth is at 3%, and you have an economy that is growing below 6%, 5.5%, per capita increase is 2.5%. Now, per capita increase of 2.5% ordinarily would be a good number in terms of growth. But that has not been happening, because the question always that leaders or policymakers do, if they think about, is not about where are our people. They think where are the sector. The question should be where are the people. The last thing is I would like to cement on the question of risking, and I think essentially what Magnus is saying, that risking to me is to make government not to be in the business of running the economy. The economy is what happens outside government. So, for example, if we're saying that our economy is growing, is producing jobs, it is not smart to say that we have created many jobs because we have employed X number in the health sector, our doctors, our nurses, our teachers. Because that is essential. That is the minimum state. What the state should do? The question should be, how is the private sector absorbing, creating more jobs? The financial sector, meaning that is allowing that the space for the private sector to do that. And for that to happen, the government has to delegate the economic part of it, not leaving it to the shackles of the private sector, but to making sure that there is enough space, the freedom of the private sector to operate, and therefore the public-private partnerships could be one of the serious ways of de-risking African economies, so that you make the economy more attractive. And lastly, it is about what Adam Smith taught us. It is about rule of law. It's about easy taxes. if we de-risk the governance structure of this continent, we will be able to reap a lot from partners like Saudi Arabia and the rest.
Thank you very much, Bravios. I think at least the theme, if not the topic of our next quarterly meeting in 2026 is going to be towards a new growth path for Africa. Perhaps some GDPism. Bravios is going to be the speaker. And we shall look at other people to see, and I say this ahead so that we can start preparing ourselves. I think we have to look at moving away from the concept of GDPism to activities and real life growth, as Magnus Oyema defined it, the real productivity, and then perhaps also explore new opportunities and new alliances for Africa instead of our old colonial one. Of course, all these things will come with risk, but this is what we do here. We take notice of difficult tasks, weigh the risk, and then try to chart a way forward. Thank you very much, everybody, for participating. Thank you for our Commonwealth scholar Magnus Oyebe. Thank you very much to Dr. Bravios. Thank you very much for everybody who has participated. Your contributions are valuable, and if you have not been able to speak today, we continue to receive your contributions in writing. And on behalf of Bravios, I promise you an essay is coming out soon.
Sure, Prof.
On the topic of today.
Yeah, we can't leave Magnus's presentation go without
a response to it.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you very much. So we shall be talking about in Nigeria, in the UK, in East Africa, and other parts of Africa. And since North Africa will come, since we mentioned it, but we're not here today. Hopefully, we shall get that response anyway. Thank you very much, everybody, and see you in our next meeting. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you,